Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Hospitality Interviews with me, Barry Clark from Dunedin Consultancy. Now, today I'm delighted to be joined by my friend and colleague, Paul Abson from Apart Hospitality. Paul, great to have you with us. Thanks for joining us today and giving us some of your time. Paul, you and I have known each other for several years. We've worked together on a couple of different projects. Some of our audience may not know you as familiar as I do. So, Paul, give us a little intro. Who are you? Where have you come from? And Apart Hospitality, tell us about this relatively new venture that you're involved with.
Barry, thank you very much. Thank you for the invite. Really, very much appreciated. A little bit of background to myself. I would say I've been in hospitality quite a number of years, really first starting in my teens, pot washing. I can recall back, if we want to go really back, at Harpen and Moat House many, many years ago, and kind of fell in love with the industry from the outset, even though that was a pretty tough role. And from there, kind of learned the ropes, as a lot of hoteliers do, really just around all the departments. And then ultimately that led into operating and actually had some ownership in some properties in the northwest of England, and spent about 11 years operating some property up there, at which point I was a franchisee as well. From there, got involved in an investment fund development piece for branded and budget properties in the UK, and then moved on to a company called Great National, and effectively developed that business within the UK to over 100 properties through organic and some acquisition. And then from there, and you're very kind to mention Apart Hospitality, which is a relatively new venture, as you rightly pointed out. I set up Apart Hospitality with my colleague Tim Penter, and Tim and I have known each other for a number of years, and just felt there was still an opportunity for us to do something for ourselves in terms of the management sphere, strategic advice and support to hoteliers, hotel owners, investors, and other organisations that would look to ourselves, and we've successfully managed to get that going even during these troubled times, and then also because we weren't quite content with that, I guess we decided we'd also spin off certain elements of our business, namely revenue management, sales, marketing support, and we have set up Apart Rev Plus, which offers technology in terms of revenue management, and layers on top of that the revenue weekly support, and we link that into sales and marketing because, of course, they fit together so particularly well. So there's two parts of our business. Thanks.
Great stuff. How ironic that similarity with our kind of backgrounds, Paul, because apart from us knowing each other for quite some time and working together on a couple of projects, I started off in the pot wash as well. Most of us, so many of us probably.
All the best do, Barry, apparently.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's probably very timely, Paul. We're speaking in late February. Only yesterday, the Westminster government made their announcement of the roadmap out of lockdown. Where I am north of the border in Scotland, we're expecting our announcement from the Scottish government, from Holyrood, later today. It's a very timely topic, and you've spoken there about new opportunities. It's often said times of economic crisis can often be the best time to start something new. Now, I think the burning question with everybody who's in the audience watching this right now will be, well, what's going to happen in the coming 10, 12 weeks? How do we get ready yet again to reopen our business? What's your thoughts on that, Paul? What do you think hotel keeping, and particularly the independent hotel world where both you and I operate mostly, what's your thoughts in terms of what it's going to look like as we rebuild and come out of this?
Gosh, I mean, it's still challenging, clearly, even with the news yesterday, which there's mixed opinion, I guess, on, and there always will be. We're aware of that politically. It's always challenging. It's clearly a bit of a shame, that we're not able to open our doors a little bit earlier. But frankly, I'm glad that there are at least some dates there for us to focus upon to start with, albeit there's numerous caveats in that. And of course, there's a number of questions particularly for the Chancellor. We haven't got to that yet, but I believe he'll be speaking again next week. And, cautiously, hoteliers are going to be concerned, I think, in the interim period as to whether the Chancellor is going to continue with, business rates relief, furlough, VAT cut extensions. My suspicion is that he will continue that. I think there's clear necessity to do so. Otherwise, there will be some businesses falling by the wayside. They won't be able to sustain anything with limited cash flows, of course, cash reserves, should I suggest. So that will need to be addressed. I'm sure it will, assuming it is, and hoteliers, I think, perhaps have the support from their backers, the banks, good investor relations, then, the approach, as I say, will be cautious, hopefully a little optimistic, to be able to take advantage of perhaps a little bit of a summer boom as we saw last year. I think, reflecting on this question, Barry, I think there's, perhaps there's three things that we can consider in terms of team, and how that structure will look now moving forward. It may change as to what it has been typically. I think there may be a need for that, and we can get into that. Technology, and also timing and time of it, and how to reopen, and the phases that we'll need to go through. So, kind of three T's, if you will, kind of team, technology, and time are the things that I've kind of been mulling over recently. And, if we take team to start with,
absolutely. I mean,
there's nothing more important than team, really, for any hospitality business.
Yeah, it's, I don't know about you. I mean, reflecting back, Paul, I've always felt, as an industry, we've always tended in the past to stick to what we know best, what we're comfortable with. And, you and I have shared probably similar time spans of, give or take, around 30 years in the industry. I know you don't look as though you're that old, Paul, but I do. I had a hard paper round.
Very good of you, Barry. Black hair would suggest otherwise.
I would go as far as to say I think there's an opportunity for owners and operators now to kind of start afresh. And if you recall the project at Stoke Rochford, when you and I first met 7-8 years ago, I was heavily involved in a restructure and a culture shift within that business to make it fit for the times that it was operating in, and fit to operate as a commercial hotel. There is an opportunity for owners to move forward, and certainly one of my priorities with that business that we've spoken about was to focus my resources where they were needed most, in terms of looking after and delivering hospitality to our customers. And I think historically that hasn't always been the case in many businesses. We get bogged down with traditional structures and not necessarily having people right at the sharp end to look after our guests. What do you think the opportunity is moving forward?
It's a great opportunity, Barry. From a hotelier's perspective, the largest, kind of cost is clearly on the payroll side, and if you can control that a little better with a new structure, then it's something that should be given considerable, thought, really. And if we look at what's been happening, of course, then owners have had to relieve themselves, unfortunately, of members of the team. I know some have been, kept on furlough, and that's a great thing. But there's many great people out there that are available, not necessarily to bring back on a full-time basis, but perhaps in a consultative way. There's an approach to consider. So as you kind of suggested there, and you're quite right, when you looked at your Stoke Rochford, you looked at where you could focus your core team, I think, in terms of the deliverables on the shop floor, if you will. And that's something that's going to have to happen moving forward. We're going to go back with reduced teams. Who inevitably are going to be working even harder than they ever did before. We'll all be happy about that because we're back at work, which is great. However, that's going to be challenging, of course. And it's inevitable that those individuals that are back are going to have to work across multiple disciplines. We've always had to do that anyway, and be flexible in what we actually do as a team member. But I think, if we can kind of refocus and recalibrate slightly, from an ownership and a general management perspective, we could be looking at this very sensibly to say, well, look, the internal team and fixed cost that's in the property is focused on delivering that customer experience and the real hospitality side of things. And then, the other elements, perhaps in terms of sales, marketing, development of technology, some of those specialist areas, dare we say, could potentially be more outsourced and used externally. And if you could even take that a little bit further from an ownership perspective and really consider, kind of management outsourced organizations who, really, if structured correctly, are very cost effective because ultimately the results based in terms of the remuneration.
I mean, if we think about it, Paul, you and I largely have operated in recent years in the independent sector. We both came from that branded corporate environment in the earlier stages of our careers. And if we reflect upon it, what do the big brands and corporates do? They've got their exec team with the expertise. Every branded hotel doesn't have its own, or most of them in this day and age don't have their own revenue function or their own sales and marketing function. It's grouped together. I think historically independent hoteliers have always seen that kind of resource as just not feasible, not possible. But I certainly, I learned when I was making that transition from branded to independent hotels that that's not necessarily always the case. And if we reflect upon it personally, that's where you and I got to know each other, because in operating a big multi-leveled, quite complex independent property at Stoke Rochford, you and your previous role with Great National, as you mentioned, were able to help us outsource a number of functions that, frankly, I didn't particularly want to have on the payroll. I couldn't afford to have on the payroll operationally. And actually, what the support from yourself allowed us to do was to bring in far greater expertise at a much more cost-effective investment level. And I certainly think there's a real opportunity for the independent market to really seize upon that moving forward.
Completely agree, Barry. There's a huge opportunity to do so. It is a bit of a minefield. However, I will kind of throw that in there a little bit because obviously you've got to get to know the people that you're working with. You've got to trust them clearly to deliver for you. It's always worth taking advice in terms of those partners that you're working with. I mean, we were talking there really upon kind of consortia support that was being provided. So there is that question for independence still and continues to be so. And this is dear to my heart because I've grown up with this ultimately, that, where do you go as an independent? And I've felt the pain and been through it many times as to who's there to support you from that sphere. Is it consortia? Is it soft brand? Is it core kind of hard brand? What's the best option for me as an independent? Do I even dare go down that route? Do I lose my independence? Do I want to do that? Independence is uniqueness. And so you've got to find the right partner, and it's about partnership, about trust, as I say, to be able to deliver for you. And you've got to try and have a voice within that structure. And that's really, really crucial for an independent.
I think it's a really good point that you raised there, that there's that constant conflict, particularly for an independent hotel owner, that the very reason you've invested in that asset and built your business is that you want to do things your own way and have your own identity. You probably find the same thing yourself. One of the constant grumbles that I hear from independent hoteliers is their perceived dominance that the brands have in the marketplace. Now, I tend to challenge people on that because I don't believe it's necessarily true. The brands can be dominant if you let them be, but there are huge advantages. I believe there is just as big a marketplace out there who seek out the independents and the individuals rather than the homogenous brands. It's horses for courses.
Oh, absolutely. Completely agree with you. It depends on your property, of course, style of your property, the location of the property. you know, to a degree, the team behind it, and what your ambition is, you know, what you want to achieve, and what you want that business to be, and you know, ultimately, you know, kind of where you're moving to over the next 5-10 years, and who can support you in achieving your desire and your goals. And yes, you can go down the hard brand route, and that's fine. That delivers for properties on many occasions, through the majority of brands, not all, but the majority. And then if you want to be on the completely other side and really want to be solely independent, but you still need that support in terms of maybe distribution, you know, kind of connectivity, online presence, then there's plenty of people that can do that for you as well, where you retain your brand name, your hotel name, and perhaps just be associated. So that there's varying degrees, of course, as to where you can go with that. There's lots of players in the market, and again, perhaps it's, you know, as an independent, if you're not au fait with this element, then, you know, just take some advice. You know, talk to folks that perhaps have had that coverage, understand the brands inside out, and can advise accordingly, because it's an important step, but it's one well worth considering.
And I'm right in saying, Paul, that, you know, a bit of differentiation for yourself and Tim with Apart Hospitality is that with your, you know, with both of your levels of experience, that's actually an area that you're able to advise and consult people with, to help them through that minefield, because it is a tricky subject. And you know, I've had that uncomfortable conversation with owners and investors in the past of which way do we go. And I think it's the size of the decision, because once you've made a commitment to that, you've got to give it time to bed in, you've got to give it time to work. But that can be a pretty uncomfortable and uncertain time while you're waiting for that relationship to bed in and to really see the benefits of it. You don't see the benefits of it overnight.
No, not normally, it has to be said. You're quite right. You know, Tim and I have both advised numerous properties on brand selection. Ultimately, we've undertaken, funnily enough, a very recent study of the market as well, and looked at the UK kind of brand positioning on a perceptual map, and dug down into actually the offerings for independent hotels, into the real detail of services, benefits, and so on, and further behind that in terms of the cost structures. Now, because there's a wide range, as we've already described, between kind of distribution only or consortia through to hard brand, there's a range of different setups in terms of the pricing structure. So actually, it's very, very difficult to compare on a like-for-like basis. So that's certainly very challenging. But you're kind of back to the point I think I made originally, whoever you choose, you've got to feel that you're in a genuine partnership with, and that you feel that you've got a voice as an owner. I think that's really important as an independent.
Absolutely. A topic of conversation I've had with quite a number of people, Paul, has been the speed with which technology, and you mentioned tech earlier on, just the speed of growth and new entrants into the market we've seen over the last 12 months. And I guess it's one of the unintended consequences of COVID and lockdown, that it's made us look at the opportunity of technological solutions to these challenges much more so than in the past. Now, another one of these conversations I was having with a mutual contact the other week, we were talking about the opportunity to embrace new technology moving forward. And I think one of the barriers that has often been, particularly with independent hoteliers, again, is that fear of making the wrong decision. You know, you and I, referring back to the Stoke Rochford project, you know, we had numerous conversations about PMS and the limitations of what we were working with at that time. And you know, as the effective MD of that business, I was reluctant to go down the road of changing PMS, because, you know, it's a huge investment. You've got that fear of change. Yeah, I said it. Even I fear change sometimes.
Yes.
And ultimately, you're thinking, well, it's going to be a huge upheaval to my business. Are we actually going to achieve a big shift in terms of efficiencies and working patterns? There's a lot of reasons not to bother with doing that. And when you're bogged down in the day-to-day of how many lunch covers you're going to do and how many rooms you're selling tonight, it's easy to just push that kind of stuff to the side. But we've got to move forward, haven't we? I mean, you know, there's some archaic processes and systems out there.
We do need to move forward as an industry, and I you know, we have done quite significantly, in my opinion, over the last, kind of 5 years or so. Yeah, I mean, my understanding of technology, I mean, it goes back quite a way. When I was independent, we moved finally from an MS-DOS prompt system, PMS, to a Windows-based, which was, we were all jumping for joy at the point. But funnily enough, we decided, obviously, this is early 2000s, and, 99, 2000, I would say even, we built a website, and of course they were completely separated. So we took the challenge of actually integrating the two right at the early days. So I've come through a bit of a journey, I guess, on the tech side. You're right; it's very typical for hoteliers, and rightly in a way, to fear effectively the unknown. And constantly to have in their mind, well, what if it goes wrong? What happens then? Is there any guarantee that it's going to be successful? And will this just take too long for it to happen? Well, it won't take too long. The technologies that are in place now mean that you're able to transfer data. The companies will support you through that transition, in a rapid time scale. It's moved at such a pace. I think you mentioned kind of legacy property PMS systems there, and we are all aware that those systems that have been quite enclosed and shut off to outside development in the past. But you see the majority of those legacy systems, certainly the larger players anyway, now opening themselves up to enable kind of best-in-class product to attach to them, if you will. Through their integrations, they're able to do that through these APIs, as they call them. And that means that the PMS can concentrate on the core element, but hotelier can benefit from so many different other elements and services and solutions that will impact potentially on their bottom line here, and improve at the same time kind of the revenues, of course, the guest engagement, as well at the same time. And if you perhaps think of things like contactless entry, online check-in and check-out, so current, so important at this moment in time, concierge apps, guest CRM and guest engagement, there's lots of opportunity there. And there's systems that can enable and assist you in upselling. So, and that's just, not even scratching the surface of opportunities for hoteliers, all in a pretty cost-effective manner, might I add as well,
I think that's the real point, isn't it, Paul? That
yeah.
I mean, one of the things you mentioned there, which is really, really topical at the moment, contactless door locks. And you'll have been in the situation that I've been in the past. You take over the operating of a legacy property. You've still got old metal keys and such. And Stowe Rochford's a prime example. I looked at switching that whole property over to card locks and such. And you were looking at 4-figure sums per door. When you've got 100+ beds in a property, those costs then, and we're only talking maybe 5 or 7 years ago, were prohibitive. I've heard of examples recently where you're looking at per room costs of less than £100 to now implement some of these real cutting edge technologies. It's been a real game changer for the industry.
Oh, 100%. And think of the time that your team is taking over a number of these elements. As you said, kind of check-in processes, handing out keys. I mean, it sounds daft, doesn't it? But people queuing at the desk waiting to go through the process. Asking reception for all the details of local attractions or local restaurants. If they're in the middle of the city centre, we'll use a concierge app. The automated process that are behind some of the CRM and guest messaging. This is all time saved, which is effectively allowing you to, kind of reduce down that fixed cost potentially, or reallocate the time for your team on other important areas also.
So absolutely. I mean, I can recall in my own time, 20 or so years ago, when I was with what's now Premier in Travelling, as it was then, we were that organization was one of the forerunners in terms of online booking platforms. And I can remember being involved, excuse me, being involved in discussions, around the kind of 2000, 2001 period of whether we thought online booking would take off or not. Now, I mean, with hindsight's a wonderful thing. Can you imagine that we were even questioning it back then?
Right. Yeah.
It's incredible to think about it. A few years later, we were debating the point of automating check-in, and no, the public will never go for it. People want that check-in experience. Now, when you look back at it now, the idea of queuing up at a hotel desk for 10 or 15 minutes to be able to pay so that you can leave, it's just archaic. It sounds ridiculous.
It really does. It really does. Absolutely, 100%. And you got to. It is more cost effective. I'm going to kind of stress that a little bit. And for those that are unsure about the technology side, it's so much more stable.
Yeah.
And that ease of integration is really and has improved considerably over the last few years. There's plenty of players there now. We could name a few. We've got the Muse, Room Raccoon, Hotel Time, Clock PMS, and the other larger kind of more legacy-based systems like Gasline, if you will, have developed considerably over the years, and it should be really considered. Alongside perhaps, look at the RMS side of things, look at the revenue management side. As well. I mean, we kind of haven't really particularly touched on that element.
I think it's important to stress, Paul, and I remember I remember watching a panel discussion at the Independent Hotel Show a couple of years ago on a similar topic, and the question of employment levels and maintaining a team was raised. And I think what's really important to stress to owners and operators here is, I don't think what either of us are talking about is downsizing. We're not talking about streamlining teams and taking staff out of your business. What I'm very much coming from with this kind of debate is allocating your resource where it's needed most. And in today's world where, things are going to be tight, things are going to be tough, realistically for the next couple of years, it's going to take time for, if you had a healthy, profitable, well-performing hotel pre-COVID, it's not just going to bounce back overnight. It's going to take time for you to rebuild, and it's going to take conscious effort to rebuild that business back to where it was. There's an opportunity here to support and help you in that path by challenging and questioning, have I got my resource in the right place? And I would always argue that the right place for your resource to be is face-to-face in front of your guests, looking after them, delivering that fantastic service. How many people have you got sat behind desks who are not actually directly contributing to that guest experience?
Yeah, that's what hospitality is all about at its heart, isn't it, Barry?
Absolutely.
They're looking after the customer.
Yeah.
So, coming to greet the customer as they walk through the door, rather than having to take them through a lengthy check-in process. Just focus the time much more. Teams are going to be paid back. There's no doubt about that. So allow the team to get in front of the customer, ultimately deliver that great service, because that's what we all go back to properties for, in the main. That experience, the joy of taking an experience, a trip, a journey. Ultimately, whether that's business or leisure, it doesn't matter. To deliver that is so vital, and your team's there able to do that better than anybody. And give them the resources and the tools to be able to concentrate on that aspect.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned a second ago there, Paul, about distribution and revenue management, which a topic that aligns very, very closely to my own specialist area of sales and business development. Now, a crucial element for every hotel moving forward. And I think especially in the last 24 hours, where we've now got certain, we've got markers in the road now as to where we should be able to reopen, perhaps partially with external, and then a full reopening coming in maybe 10, 12 weeks time. For every hotelier watching this session right now, I would suggest the thing that should be forefront in their mind is getting their sales funnel rebuilt. And I think it's fair to say I don't think many have. Conversations I've been having, the responses I've been getting is, well, we'll do that when we're open again. Now, I've got pretty strong feelings on that when you're open is too late. If we're looking at a timescale of kind of 10 to 12 weeks to reopening the doors, there's a lot of things you can and should be doing right now, both from a sales and business development point of view, but also crucially from a revenue and distribution point of view. Am I off being left field there, Paul? Am I being controversial?
Not at all, Barry. I mean, not in the slightest. I mean, there's two sides there. That we've been given the dates, haven't we? In terms of what we can aspire to in terms of opening. We know that depends upon the location of your property. We'll have a variance degree in terms of the business that you're going to have coming through your doors over the summer period. In reality, last summer we saw that the coastal country properties did particularly well out of the staycation. We know that the cities struggled and were slower to bring back business, and that will continue to be the case moving forward for the interim, kind of short to medium term. We're all aware of that ultimately. So those locations in the cities, town centres, are going to have to work that a little bit harder and be creative in their sales and marketing, and to develop that plan to encourage people to come back in to see them. And it will be highly competitive, of course. It will also be highly competitive in those other regions. But there's a likelihood, certainly over the summer, as we open, let's hope, that it will be competitive, but there will be business there. So ensure that you maximize your revenue opportunity, of course. That's absolutely fundamental. And I guess to your point, Barry, don't do it when your doors open. It would be too late. It should be too late. I'm sure there are bookings now coming in for certain for the UK market, and your pricing point has to be right on the money, right on the button ultimately. And you have to, in my mind, if you haven't got somebody internally that focuses on this, then you perhaps need to look towards the tech side of things, because that is able to churn out and look at the vast amounts of data, much quicker than really any individual can do ultimately. And it can cope with the changing market, of course. And fluctuate, pricing and forecasts. You can automate your forecast to a degree, but have a view of it. So the software is there now available to you to use. Our very own system has been adapted specifically, to be able to adjust to the impact of competitive pricing and in historic performance. Now, very recent historic performance isn't particularly there. So you've got to take a view on that. But if you've got the ability to override that also, then you've got something of significant strength. And even if you do have somebody internally, utilizing the system will enable them to look more strategically at what they're doing. And then I think to your point, Barry, then link it back into the sales and marketing process and activities, which is fundamental.
Absolutely.
So, it's the blend of having the data, the technology, understanding it, interpreting it correctly, and linking it into your activity in terms of your sales and marketing, if that's the big push.
Yep.
But for those that are due to open, around about mid-May onwards, then we would, for the coastal and kind of country properties, those that are going to take advantage of the boom, it's time now, frankly, to consider what your options are, whether that's internal, external, whether that's manual or making use of technology. Is to make those decisions really now. Talk to your consultants, get your demonstrations done for systems. If you want to look at that, do it now, look at it, and give yourself a month to implement it, because you need to be able to do that. So we can plug the data in between system and PMS and so on. Yep. So, I completely agree, Barry, and I would do on that question. And we know, look, we've experienced this multiple times. It's not by mistake that, the large companies implement these systems. It's very much available to the independent sector now, and on a very cost-effective basis as well. And so just on the time element, I think we've nailed it really. Consider things now. Take your demonstrations, talk, take advice, and look at it seriously, and then look to implement before your doors open. Kind of any time now between now and May in reality.
Yep.
These things have to happen because, there's a window of opportunity.
Absolutely. I think that the signs are all there, that the pent up demand for domestic, and as we say, in those rural coastal country locations, we saw good signs of it last year. There's no reason why it should be any different this year. For those with the more city-based, town-based, it is going to be a bit more challenging, but I think there will be quite a lot of pent up demand. We've already, anecdotally, we're already seeing in the last 24 hours a surge in terms of, I'm seeing it reported this morning in terms of both domestic and overseas leisure travel. I guess the test will be over the coming days whether that surge in inquiries converts into bookings. But to convert them into bookings, you've got to have your availability, you've got to have your products and your packages in the market for people to book. People can't book a product that you're not marketing. And for those properties in the kind of the events and activity space, you need to have your people and your processes and your systems in place to be able to react to the inquiries that I think inevitably are going to come in. Reality is, in the last 6 to 12 months, owners and hoteliers have had to make some very tough, very difficult decisions, and a lot of that resource has been lost from within properties. You can't act too quickly, and certainly in my own opinion, to put that resource back into place. Critically important, because as an operator described to me in the last couple of weeks, they were talking about last July when the Scottish market reopened, and their description was overnight it was like going from a baby crawl to running the 100-meter sprint final in the Olympics. That was what the day of reopening was like for them, and I don't think it'll be any different this time round.
I agree. I think the slight difference here is that there's a date that's that's been given that's a couple of months ahead of us.
Yep.
So there's now, and I think that's what we've been asking for over time.
Yep.
Is over the last year is that actually we have a date. Back to the point from the outset, there are caveats around that, of course, but it feels like there's a date that actually we can kind of really focus on.
Sure.
And have a little bit more confidence about because of the vaccines and so on.
Yep.
And because of that, we can plan better.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we need to be slightly cautious, and we need to take a considered approach, and we can plan for it. But ultimately, I wouldn't wait around too long in terms of getting your support systems in place, because back to the point, that window of opportunity is there. We all know that once the doors are open, the teams are sucked straight back into operations.
Yep.
And that time is lost ultimately, and that can impact your bottom line. Absolutely.
One final question, Paul, which one that we haven't discussed before, but I don't think I'm firing anything too unrealistic here for you. Topic of conversation I've had with a few people recently is the day of fixed non-refundable pre-purchase packages. Has that day gone? Has the market so fundamentally changed moving forward? What's your thoughts?
It's going to be an interesting one, Barry, as to whether we fall back into our old practices and processes, and that's difficult to judge, frankly. Who knows in a year's time if we've actually been able to have the economy open up, restrictions take totally out, then perhaps that will be considered. Certainly for the short to medium term, then it's not realistic to have a non-refundable. I think hoteliers are finding ways to address that quite effectively. I mean, I know of a couple of Lake District properties, for example, who are creating a kind of a club which enables you not necessarily to be refunded, but to at least be able to transfer your date easily without quibble for whatever particular reason in this current time frame. So there's certainly ways to be adapting that to ensure that actually you can take some money up front and be secure in that as a hotelier, but allow the customer to have that bit of flexibility that they're going to need. So
flexibility that's key moving forward, isn't it?
100%. So for the short term, I think the hoteliers are finding ways around this, finding the opportunities. Is it completely dead, the non-refundable? Who knows? I think it's a difficult one to judge. As I say, in a year's time, we may we might be back to, to a significant sense of normality, and we might have kind of felt that we can go back to that. For the time being, shouldn't be using it.
I think we've, as an industry, we've always tended to go straight to price, haven't we, to try and stimulate demand. And I guess where I'm coming from is that I think the new marketplace that we're about to go into is going to be really quite different, where I think price will be much lower down in the consumer's decision-making process. And I think quality, flexibility, and that feeling of safety and well-being is going to be far higher on people's agenda than just what is the base price.
Very much so, Barry. And if you wrap into that also experience, the genuine experience of hospitality, as we focused on through this conversation today, and the team delivering that, but also the additional experiences, if it's from a leisure perspective, what else can I do at the hotel and in the surrounding area, where the hotelier can package and promote that and genuinely create a phenomenal experience based on, some form of personalization.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Paul, time's against us, but as always, an absolute pleasure. Just before we head off, a great wealth of knowledge and experience, both from yourself and with Tim, both of whom I know well. How can people get in contact with you? How can they carry on the conversation with you?
We'd be delighted to talk to anybody. Look, we're here for a conversation, for a chat. It's very informal for ourselves in that regard. We're passionate about the industry. He's genuinely passionate about the industry. We focus a little bit on the independents today. It's something that we've got a huge amount of experience with. So you're very welcome. Come and visit us online at aparthospitality.com, which is more on the strategic review, assistance, consultancy, or management, full management, if you wish. Or on the other side, apartrevplus.com, which is with the revenue technology, revenue management support, and sales and marketing side.
Well, thanks very much indeed. We'll put links when this goes out. We'll put links to your website and how people can contact you. An absolute pleasure. Thanks ever so much for your time, Paul, and we'll see you soon.
You're very welcome, Barry. Thank you.